Hi, I'm Lael, and you're watching English with Lael. Today, I'm going to talk about tensed and modal verbs. You may not know what that means right now, but by the time I'm finished, you will. Okay, so in English, we have two kinds of verbs. Most of our verbs that we use are tensed. They have what we call a tense. They also have an aspect. Okay, so tensed verbs have names like simple present or past perfect. Can you think of another one? Oh, good one. Those are just two examples. They have lots of other names too. Present perfect, past perfect, progressive, things like that. They can be a little scary sounding sometimes, okay? So most verbs are this type of verb, and the verbs change. They change to match their subject. So, for example, I go, but he goes. That's what I mean by they match their subject, okay? They also show tense. So these verbs are only past and present. Future is actually a modal verb, so I'll get to that in a minute. So past and present are the tenses that we have in English. These verbs also have what we call aspect. And these are perfect, progressive, or if there's actually kind of no aspect, we call it simple aspect. Okay, so a tensed verb might be something like, I am watching a movie. This am matches the subject I, okay, matches subject. It shows tense. This shows a present, now type of feeling, right? Type of time. And aspect. This shows an ing or progressive aspect. So these verbs change a lot and have a lot of information, okay? Other examples might be, she went to Paris. I love Paris, so I would like for this to refer to me anytime soon. She went to Paris. This one shows some past. It shows a simple aspect. It matches your subject, she. Okay, so that's what most verbs do in English. As I mentioned before, we use more tensed verbs in English than modal verbs. So these are what we use the most. So if you were only going to learn one, I would start with the tensed verbs. And I'll have lots more information in other videos and articles that will tell you more about each type of tensed verb. Today I just want you to get a very basic idea of what a tensed verb is. Okay? So now I'm going to erase so I have room, and I'm going to teach you about modal verbs next. Okay, now for the modal verbs. Modal verbs are very different from tensed verbs. We do not use them as often as we use tensed verbs. As I said earlier, in English we really only have two tenses, and they are past and present. So future verbs, if we say, I will see you tomorrow, that's, excuse me, that's actually a modal verb. It's not a tensed verb. So modal verbs do not change to match a subject. They actually don't really change for any reason. They do not show tense. They don't show time. Okay? Modal verbs, the word modal is related to the word mood. So if I'm in a good mood, I'm really happy, right? If I'm in a sad mood or grumpy mood, that tells you kind of how I'm feeling. And these are verbs that tell sort of a feeling or an idea, but it's not usually time related. Although there is one that's time related. So the will, we use it for future, and that's part of its mood, okay? Will is just kind of in a future mood most of the time, although not always, okay? So modal verbs, the way we make these is we use a modal, and then we put the action or the verb that tells you what's going on next. So for example, I will go home. This is my modal, will. This is my verb, my main verb, go. Okay? So the will tells you kind of the mood of go. Okay? Others include might, can, could, must. What's your favorite? I bet you can think of one that goes along with these, right? May. There are some that are two words that are really called semi-modals, but we have also used to, ought to, had better. Those are the same. They act similar to modals, okay? You will notice that a subject that changes will not change this verb. I will go home. You will go home. They will go home. We will go home. She will go home. This will not change no matter what your subject is. So not like the tensed verb that we talked about earlier. Okay? So a modal verb is always going to be more than one word. Always. Because you have to have your modal, will, might, can, could, must, may, ought to, had better, should, etc., and your main verb. You're always going to have at least two words to make any modal. But once you figure out what those two words are, you will not have to change them, okay? If you can make a modal, you can make a modal. Then you don't have to change it to match a subject, to show tense, or anything else, okay? So I hope that this has helped you understand something basic about English verbs, which is that we have tensed and modal verbs which act differently. Remember, we use tensed verbs much more often than we use modal verbs, okay? So I'm going to leave you with a question. Do you think we use past and present verbs more often, or do you think we use future verbs more often? Remember, future verbs are actually modals. Hope this helps. I'm Leo, and you're watching English with Leo. Go out and learn a lot of English. Bye now.